Senator Jim Inhofe introduced a bill to give Pentagon leaders flexibility with their funding if automatic budget cuts are triggered in March. Inhofe says military leaders should have the authority to determine how budget cuts are made if they go into effect. The cuts were the result of a 2011 deal to raise the debt ceiling. Now, if the budget cuts take hold, the military would have to bear half of the $1 trillion in cuts. Inhofe's proposal would allow military officials to transfer money across their many accounts to lessen that impact of the budget cuts. The Oklahoman's political expert Chris Casteel joins us now from the nation's capital with more on this situation. Chris, good morning. How are you?
Hey, I'm good, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for your time today. Now, Chris, if the budget cuts go into effect, how will it impact Oklahoma's military bases?
It would be dramatic. I mean, if they go into effect, Dave, you basically got less than half of the fiscal year left to make these cuts, and the $500 billion is actually over a 10-year period. So the military would actually have to cut about $50 billion in just a few months, and that would mean furloughs of thousands of civilian workers in Oklahoma, and basically they would just have to every single base. And when we've got at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City, huge aircraft repair maintenance center there. It does a lot of work on engines, other parts of aircraft. Almost all those civilians would probably face furloughs. They would obviously have to scale back all the maintenance that they do on planes, which means planes would not be ready for their missions. At Fort Sill, down around Lawton, a huge Army training post down there, artillery training, they would have to furlough civilians training. The artillery school would have to cut back. You'd have fewer students graduating. We've got Air Force bases in Altus and around Enid Advanced Air Force Base that do pilot training. That would be scaled back. There are not as many civilians there, but the ones that are there would obviously have to take unpaid days off as well. And the furloughs, for the estimates from the Pentagon, have been as many as 22 days over those few months. So it could come out to almost 3 days per month of furlough. So basically everything that these bases do would have to be dramatically scaled back in a short time frame.
And of course, with cuts like that, there's collateral damages, meaning there's the businesses that surround these bases that are directly impacted by the people that work at those bases. We're joined by Chris Casteel via Skype from Washington, D.C. And Chris, a White House spokesman said President Barack Obama wants a balanced approach to replacing the total amount of the cuts. So how does Senator Inhofe's plan differ from that of the president's plan?
Well, Senator Inhofe's plan, the one that he came up with this week, would really only kick in if the cuts were to go into effect. He is trying his best really to stop the cuts from ever going to an effect. And the only way that they can do that is for the White House and members of Congress, House and Senate, to come up with a way to replace the way they're currently structured. And we have put a lot of emphasis on the military because they have to bear half of it, and that's a big hit in those communities. But this would affect, or the other half has to be absorbed by other agencies. I mean, you're talking about the Weather Service, you're talking about the FAA. We've got a huge FAA center in Oklahoma City. Everything the government does would be cut back beginning March 1st. So what Inhofe wants to do is come up with a different way to institute these cuts. Republicans do not want to do away with these cuts. They want spending cut, and this is $1 trillion in spending cuts. So there's not going to be much Republican favor for any plan that would do away with these cuts going into effect. It's just a matter of how they're distributed among the various federal agencies. And what Senator Inhofe proposed last week is in what he considers a worst case scenario, that the military does have to take this $50 billion hit this year immediately. Let the Pentagon do it, the way that they think best. Right now they're restricted in how they can move money from their various accounts. This would give them the freedom to kind of shift money around to mitigate the impact of it. But what the White House is saying is that we're not going to agree to any deal to restructure these cuts, mitigate them anyway, unless more revenue is involved, which means it's not going to be tax hikes per se in the income tax rates or anything like they did for a fiscal cliff, but it would be changes in the tax code, maybe even eliminating some of the tax breaks that oil and gas companies get.
Hey, Chris, what's been the reaction from other Oklahoma lawmakers?
Well, it's an all-Republican delegation, and they all want the spending cuts to go into effect, but few want them to hit the military the way they are now. And I talked to Congressman Tom Cole, a Republican at Moore, whose district includes two huge bases, Tinker Air Force Base and Fort Sill. He does not want these cuts to go into effect the way they're structured, but he has the pulse of the House Republicans on this. Plus, he sits on the Budget Committee in the House and the Appropriations Committee that oversees defense spending, and he's convinced that if this is the only way for this $1 trillion of cuts to go into effect, that Republicans will let it happen because they want those cuts. What he says is what he wants to do. He's going to come back to Washington next week. They're out this week, and encourage Republicans to pass another bill to redistribute the way these cuts are done, so defense doesn't bear as big a part of it.
Chris Casteel from Washington. Sir, thank you so much for your time today.
Glad to do it, Dave.
All right, we'll have more coverage from Chris Casteel in the Oklahoman and online at newsok.com.